It was just a kiss on the cheek. But the way she held it there, longer than she should have, made my entire world slow down. In that quiet pause, I realized nothing between us. I've lived in this neighborhood for almost 2 years now. It's quiet, familiar, the kind of place where the days slip into each other without much change. My routines are simple: work, a jog in the evening, maybe a book on the porch before the sun goes down. I never expected anything extraordinary here. But sometimes, extraordinary hides in plain sight. From the very beginning, I noticed her. My neighbor's wife. She wasn't the kind of woman who tried to stand out, not loud, not showy. Instead, she carried herself with this grace. The kind of presence that makes you straighten your shoulders without even realizing. Her movements were calm, deliberate. She had this way of brushing her hair behind her ear while listening, as if nothing in the world could distract her from the person in front of her. At first, our conversations were nothing. A smile over the fence while she watered her plants. A polite, "good morning," when I jogged past their driveway. Just the small exchanges neighbors trade without thinking. But she remembered things. If I mentioned I had a long week ahead, the next time I saw her, she'd ask how it went. If I said I was working on fixing my old car, she'd glance over at the driveway later and ask if it had finally started. It seemed small, but it wasn't. Not to me. Most people just let those details drift past. But with her, it felt like she was gathering little pieces of me, holding them quietly, like they mattered. And then there was the way she laughed. She didn't laugh the way most people do, quick, easy, and done. No. Her laughter was soft, like she tried to keep it hidden, but couldn't quite. And when I was the reason for it, something inside me warmed, as if the world had briefly tilted in my favor. I started to notice more than I should have. The faint clink of her bracelet when she adjusted her sleeves. The delicate scent of her perfume that lingered on the breeze after she walked back inside. The way the afternoon sun lit strands of her hair, turning them copper against the fading sky. I told myself I was just being observant. Just noticing. But there was a quiet pull I couldn't explain, something about her attention, her steadiness, that made our ordinary chats feel like the most important part of my day. And I remember one evening, standing by the fence, listening to her talk about a recipe she wanted to try, and realizing I wasn't even paying attention to the words anymore. I was watching her eyes, the way they softened when she smiled, and I felt this faint pressure in my chest. A feeling I hadn't expected, and definitely shouldn't have had. That was when I knew, this wasn't just neighborly kindness. Something was unfolding. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. Would ever feel the same again? It didn't happen all at once. The shift between us was quiet, gradual. Like watching the seasons change, you don't notice it until suddenly the air feels different, and you realize everything around you has been moving in that direction all along. Our conversations became longer. What used to be a polite wave or a passing word at the fence turned into pauses that stretched on. She'd lean her arms over the wooden rail, her body angled toward me, as if she had nowhere else to be. Her questions weren't small talk anymore. They carried weight. She asked about my family, my childhood, even the dreams I hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. And I found myself answering honestly. I didn't try to impress her. I didn't put on a mask. Around her, there was no need. She listened in a way that made silence feel safe, like even the parts of me I usually kept hidden could belong in the open. But beneath that comfort, I began to sense something else. A kind of loneliness in her, quiet but present. Sometimes, while she spoke, her smile would falter mid-sentence, as though she'd caught herself revealing too much. And then she'd glance down at her hands, fidgeting with her ring, before quickly shifting the subject. I pretended not to notice. But I did. Every time. The first time she touched me, it wasn't much. Just a hand on my arm. I'd fixed the latch on their gate one Saturday afternoon, and when she came out to see, she thanked me. Her hand rested on my forearm, light, almost casual. But in that instant, I felt the warmth of her skin seep through my sleeve. The touch was brief, only a few seconds, but it lingered in me long after she'd gone inside. I remember walking back to my own house, my arms still tingling, as if her fingers had left a memory I couldn't shake. And from that moment on, the space between us seemed thinner. She'd stand a little closer when we spoke. I'd catch her eyes drifting toward me when she thought I wasn't looking. When she laughed, it was softer if no one else was around, as though that version of her was only meant for me. Even the smallest things felt amplified. The dusk light catching her hair, making it glow like strands of copper. The faint scent of her perfume mixed with the evening breeze. The sound of her voice lowering when she asked me something personal, drawing me in without effort. I told myself it was nothing. Just neighborly warmth, simple friendliness. But my heart didn't believe it. Every conversation left me unsettled, in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Because I knew, if I kept letting myself notice, if I kept letting myself feel this quiet pull toward her, it was only a matter of time before we crossed into something we couldn't take back. It was one of those evenings where the air felt heavy, almost too still, like the world was holding its breath. I had just come back from a run, the kind where sweat clings to your skin even after you've stopped, and I saw her sitting alone on the porch. A glass of wine in her hand, her legs curled up under her, the faint glow from the porch light softening her features. She looked over, caught my eye, and for a second, I thought she might wave me off. But instead, she smiled, not her usual practiced, neighborly smile, but something gentler, tired in a way. And she said, "Come sit for a while." I hesitated. I knew I should have gone inside, taken a shower, carried on with my night. But there was something in her voice, a note that sounded more like need than invitation. So I crossed over and sat down on the step beside her. At first, we talked about nothing. The weather, the garden, the kind of idle words people use to fill space. But the longer we sat, the more the silence between us thickened, until finally she sighed, this long, quiet sound that felt like the truth slipping out of her. She told me she'd been feeling tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep. The deeper kind, tired of being the one who holds everything together. Tired of smiling when no one notices how much effort it takes. She didn't say much about her husband, but I could hear the absence in her words. The loneliness hidden in them. And for the first time, I felt her walls lower. I told her things too, about how I felt stuck, uncertain about where I was headed in life. How sometimes I wondered if I was wasting time, if I was already behind. I hadn't meant to open up, but her silence, her steady gaze, made me feel like I could. We sat there, trading little pieces of honesty in the summer dark, and with each one, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even clear. But it was real. At one point, she laughed, soft, almost shy, and the sound made me smile without thinking. I glanced at her, and she was looking at me differently. Her head tilted just slightly, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. For a moment, her eyes flicked down, lingering where they shouldn't have, at my lips. Then quickly, she looked away. My chest tightened. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The night around us seemed louder, cicadas humming, the creak of the porch beneath our chairs, even the brush of her bare foot sliding against mine under the table. She didn't pull it back, and I didn't either. We didn't speak of it. Didn't acknowledge it. But in that quiet, with the air thick and her eyes avoiding mine, we both knew something had shifted. Something that couldn't be undone. The sky had been threatening rain all afternoon. Heavy gray clouds stacked themselves above the houses, the kind that promised a storm you couldn't ignore. I was out in the yard, putting away tools, when I heard her call my name from across the fence. She was standing by the porch, looking up at the sky like it carried a secret. "Would you mind helping me bring in a few things before it starts?" she asked, her voice casual, though her eyes held me longer than the question required. Of course, I said yes. By the time I crossed into her yard, the first drops had begun to fall, slow, heavy, soaking into my shirt almost immediately. Together, we rushed to pull in the cushions from the chairs, stack the gardening tools by the wall, and gather the scattered laundry she had left on the line. It should have been simple. It should have been nothing. But every movement felt magnified. The brush of her shoulder as we bent down at the same time. The way her hair, damp from the drizzle, clung to her cheek until she tucked it behind her ear. The faint smell of rain mixed with her perfume, wrapping around me, making it hard to focus on anything but her. By the time we carried the last chair inside, the storm had broken open. Rain hammered against the windows, thunder rumbling low and steady. We stood there in the entryway, clothes damp, breaths uneven from rushing. She laughed lightly, shaking her head. Well, we made it just in time. But her voice was softer than her words. And when she looked at me, there was something else in her eyes, something I couldn't name, but felt all the same. The space between us was small, barely a step. She lifted a hand to push back her wet hair again, but it trembled slightly, her fingers brushing her temple, then falling to her side. Her gaze lingered on me, drifting lower before snapping back to my eyes. My pulse thundered louder than the storm outside. For a moment, I thought, no, I knew, she wanted me to move closer. The air between us carried that charged silence, the kind where every second feels stretched thin, on the edge of breaking. I could see the rise and fall of her breath, the faint dampness clinging to the curve of her collarbone where the rain had touched her. I wanted to reach out, to tuck that strand of hair behind her ear myself, to bridge the inch between us. But I didn't. Neither of us did. Instead, we just stood there, the sound of the storm swallowing everything else. She let out the faintest sigh, her lips parting as though she might speak, but no words came. And then she stepped back. Just slightly. Enough to remind us both where the lines were. Yet even in that retreat, I felt it, the closeness we hadn't dared cross. The almost. The storm raged on outside, but the real storm was inside me. The storm had slowed to a gentle drizzle by the time I said I should leave. It was late, later than I realized, and the air between us had grown so thick with unspoken things that I wasn't sure I could stand there any longer without breaking. She walked me to the door, her arms folded lightly across her chest as though she was holding herself together. Neither of us spoke much. The silence wasn't awkward, exactly, it was heavy, like words hovering just out of reach. I stood there, one hand on the doorframe, unsure if I should thank her for the evening, or for trusting me, or for something I couldn't even put into words. Instead, I just said, "Good night." My voice sounded smaller than I intended. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine. And then she stepped closer. Not much, just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off her skin, the faint scent of rain and perfume clinging to her. Her hand lifted slowly, almost uncertainly, until her fingers brushed the side of my face. The touch was gentle, deliberate. Her palm rested against my cheek, warm and steady, and before I could even process it, she leaned in. Her lips touched my cheek. Not quickly. Not the casual kind of kiss neighbors sometimes give in passing. This was different. She pressed her mouth against my skin slowly, tenderly, and then, she held it there. The world seemed to stop. Her breath warmed my skin, her lips soft and trembling just slightly, as though she was fighting herself even as she stayed. My chest tightened, my body locked in place, afraid that even the smallest movement would break the spell. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting myself feel it. The weight of her hand cradling my face. The warmth of her kiss seeping deeper than skin, into something I couldn't shield. It wasn't passion. It wasn't reckless. It was something quieter, something far more dangerous, longing, unspoken and restrained, finally given shape. When she finally pulled back, it wasn't sudden. She lingered, her lips leaving my cheek slowly, her hand still cupping my face as though she wasn't ready to let go. Her eyes met mine then, wide, uncertain, shining with something that looked like both fear and relief. Neither of us said a word. What could we have said? The silence between us carried everything. After a long moment, her hand slipped away, fingers trailing lightly down my jaw before falling to her side. She stepped back, but the space between us didn't feel empty. It felt fuller than it ever had. I whispered goodnight again, though my voice caught in my throat, and she only nodded, her lips pressing together as if to keep something from escaping. When I walked out into the rain-soaked night, the cool air did nothing to ease the heat still burning on my cheek. That kiss, innocent to anyone else, but devastating to me, had changed everything. The days after that night felt different. From the outside, nothing had changed. The world carried on, neighbors mowing lawns, kids riding bikes down the street, dogs barking at passing cars. To anyone else, she and I were exactly the same. Polite smiles. Short exchanges. Two neighbors sharing ordinary routines. But under the surface, everything had shifted. The memory of her kiss stayed with me, not just the warmth of it, but the way she held it. That pause, that lingering press of her lips against my cheek, replayed in my mind at the quietest times, brushing my teeth in the morning, standing in line at the store, lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling. Every time I saw her after that, my chest tightened. Our conversations became shorter at first. Hesitant. Like we were afraid of touching something fragile. She would glance at me, then quickly look away, her fingers fiddling with the thin chain of her necklace. I'd shove my hands into my pockets, unsure of what to do with them, unsure of what to say. But then, there were moments when that caution cracked. One evening, she brought over a plate of cookies she had baked. Her husband wasn't home, and though she didn't say it, I could tell she'd made them with me in mind. When I opened the door, she held out the plate, her smile soft, a little too careful. I took it from her, our fingers brushing lightly, a brief, electric touch that made my breath catch. Another time, I saw her out in the garden. She was kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds, her hair pulled back, tendrils slipping loose to frame her face. When she noticed me, she pushed a strand behind her ear and smiled in that quiet way, the one that wasn't meant for anyone else. I smiled back, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Just held the glance longer than we should have, until she bent her head back down, pretending to busy herself with the soil. It wasn't avoidance. It was tension. A careful dance of pretending, even as the truth hummed louder between us. At night, lying in bed, I'd think about the way her hand had cupped my cheek. How natural it had felt, how steady her touch was, like she'd wanted to stay in that moment as much as I did. And I'd wonder what she thought about when she closed her eyes at night. If her heart quickened at the memory the way mine did. And yet, neither of us said anything. We couldn't. Or maybe we wouldn't. But the silence wasn't empty. It was weighted, charged, alive with the knowledge that we'd crossed some invisible line and had no way of stepping back. Every smile, every glance, every touch after that felt like a thread pulled tighter. And I knew, eventually, something had to give. It happened a few evenings later, just as the sun was slipping low and the neighborhood had that quiet, golden stillness to it. I was out by the fence, half-heartedly watering my plants, when I heard her footsteps. I didn't turn right away. My chest tightened the moment I realized it was her. When I finally looked, she was standing there, arms loosely crossed, as if she wasn't sure whether to come closer or keep her distance. For a moment, we just stood on either side of the fence, the silence stretching. The weight of everything we hadn't said hung in the air between us. Then, slowly, she exhaled. "I don't want to pretend with you anymore," she said softly. Her voice wasn't steady, but it wasn't breaking either. Just honest. "I know what happened that night, it wasn't nothing. And I can't keep acting like it didn't mean something to me." Her words struck me like a current. My throat tightened, but I nodded, because I couldn't lie either. "It meant something to me too," I admitted, my voice low. More than I can put into words. She looked down at her hands gripping the edge of the fence, her knuckles pale. I'm not asking for more than this, she said. I can't. But I need you to know, having you here, talking with you, it's reminded me I'm still alive. That I can still feel something real. Her words hit deeper than I expected. I stepped closer, until my hands rested lightly on the fence beside hers. Our fingers didn't touch at first, but the nearness alone was enough to make my pulse quicken. I don't see you as a distraction, I said quietly. You're not just filling some empty space in my life. You are the space. The part one looked forward to. That was when her hands moved, slowly, hesitantly, until they rested over mine. Warm, steady, her fingers curling just enough to hold on. I looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes were damp, but not with sadness, with relief. With release. She leaned forward slightly, her forehead coming to rest gently against mine across the narrow divide of the fence. The world went silent. Her hair brushed my temple, her breath soft against my skin, and for a long moment, we just stayed there. No words. No movement. Just the quiet rhythm of two people finally allowing themselves to be. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't reckless. It was something deeper, a moment of tenderness carved out of everything we couldn't say aloud. Eventually, she drew back, though her hands stayed on mine. This is enough, she whispered. It has to be. But, thank you for letting me feel again. I nodded, my chest aching with a mix of longing and gratitude. And thank you, I whispered back. The sun dipped below the horizon then, leaving us in the soft glow of twilight, our hands still linked on the rough wood of the fence. It wasn't forever. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And sometimes, real is enough. If this story touched you the way it touched me, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more slow burn romance stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt that kind of unspoken connection with someone? I'd love to hear your stories.